Okay.
All right. Hello. My name is Anthony Zeri. I am a high school Spanish teacher from Chicago.
Hi, my name is Kim. I am a ESL teacher at two language schools in Boston. Based off of the Common European Framework of Reference, I teach between A1 and B2.
Hello, my name is Kevin, and I'm an ESL teacher in South Korea.
So I think we all wanted to first start off with the new standards, which is the Common Core state standards and then the next generation science standards. And from what we read in this and also week three's reading, is that not everyone is adopting it. The Common Core, 45 states have adopted it, and with the next generation, only a handful of states have. So that brings in the question what these standards do for ELLs, especially when you're talking about classifying them, putting them into these classes, and then also measuring them as they go. And if these states can adopt it or not, and then either adopt the ELP standards or create their own standards within the ELP, what does that say for the United States as a whole, where from one place you are this level and then from a different state or even a different district you're placed into something else? And I don't understand why they can't just make it into everyone has to opt in, where you're labeling all these students the same cross
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you want to go, Kevin? So I think that this brings into the argument that LaQuanti brought up quite a bit, where, she's talking about that there are these, like, there is a need for consistency because, like you mentioned, Kim, it's right now it's kind of helter skelter of every state is doing something entirely different. So it is nice that there is commonality that's coming in with the Common Core and with the next generation science standards. But my question would then be, why, if you are having these standards and if 45 states are doing it, it's the vast majority of the country. Like you said, Kim, why not just make it so that, these are the way that it's going? Why not make everybody opt in and all the other 5 states get on board with that? But also it brings the question of there's these consortia that were also mentioned by LaQuanti, that, there's these two major consortia that different states are, falling into, and each of them is interpreting the standards in a different way. So if they're each interpreting the standards in a different way, they're going to come up with two different end results. And if we're going for consistencies, this seems like a backwards way of getting consistencies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I believe in the reading too, it talks about how the American Federation of Teachers requested a moratorium on this whole process. I forget if exactly for the standards or these consortia-based assessments, but I think there is a lot of confusion out there in terms of how effective this is and what impact this has, not only on content teachers, but also ESL teachers.
Yeah, I think it also brings in the question of, well, I know a lot of teachers, and I mentioned in the article that there are a lot of questions that teachers have about Common Core and kind of the widespread implications of teaching to these new standards of, is it going to lead to a lot of teaching to the test? And, Brown and Abewick Rama mentioned the whole washback phenomenon of, you know, tests can impact teaching. It can have a backwards effect and impact teaching. And I know a lot of teachers from the article, it mentions that a lot of them are worried about Common Core because they're worried that it's going to lead to just teaching to the test.
Mm-hmm. And based off of just teaching to the test and then what those students are studying in the classrooms and that having effect on the curriculum and the standards, there's the issue of these expectations that teachers are supposed to meet, where if they have these students who are varying levels and they have to teach to each of them, how does that affect the standards when maybe the pace isn't right, where there's a lot of like catch up to do, and
Mm.
that affects student performances, and that shows negatively when you're comparing it to the standards? At that point, the students are doing a lot. There's a lot of expectations from both sides. And I know earlier, Kevin, you were talking about before our recording the getting what it was. Wow, I'm
Those 6 standards were you trying to think about? Or those 6 principles?
no, I'm blanking on it. Come back to me, I'll remember it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, kind of bouncing off of what you said, Ken. Like one of the quotes that I really remembered from this article is that it kind of said that curriculum now, because of these standards, is get ESL students or ELL students to progress through contents quickly and like give them the skills to do analytical tasks, which are new, like from these standards, like more analytical based questions. And the goal is to do it as quickly as possible, as quickly as possible. And I think that is like a risky situation of teaching to the test, trying to like push ELLs too quickly. Like you said, there are different proficiency levels, and so the effects of that are really like things that need to be considered by teachers.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious to see how that would look because like Valdes, Kibler, and Walqui, I don't know if that's how you say your name, but they mention on page 25 that like teachers must invite students to engage in rigorous cross-disciplinary activity from their first class, like their very, very first class. I'm just very interested to see how this would look. Just, the person is brand new to the whole country and here you're doing math and you barely know English at all. And like, I'm very intrigued to see how that would look like. And, as a Spanish teacher, I'm not very well versed in ESL, but it seems like a really, really large undertaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and is that like an effect of the Lau versus Nickel? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Sorry, Kim, did you figure out what you were going to say?
Oh no, I just remembered. So based off of what we were just talking about, and also trying when a student comes in and having to have the language but also learn the content.
Right.
You talked about earlier about these ELLs, they have to not just meet the standards of content, but content and language, and that adds an additional burden where they have to be tested twice.
Right.
And so, Anthony, when you were talking about if a brand new student comes in and they don't have the language to learn the content, they sort of fall behind a bit and they need to catch up with that, which also ties in with Lau and Nichols, which we were going into, where these, from the mandate and passing of Lau versus Nichols, we see that you can't exclude ALLs from the conversation in terms of who's learning the content. Well, if you think in the mindset of a content teacher, if they don't have a language, how can they learn the content? And that way of thinking, we can't do that. We have to integrate these students into the educational program where they are getting the support that they need to get the language in order to meet the content that they have to learn.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it all falls back on just teacher preparation and professional development and that kind of thing. And we kind of probably need, and they mentioned it in the article, kind of a rethinking of what goes into preparing educators to work with ELLs. And it's a task for both, ESL teachers specifically, but also content area teachers as well, because you never know what it's going to look like in the school, how many ESL teachers a school might have, what the model is, because as we see from the article, on pages, what is it? Like I think 17 to 19, there's multiple different models that all work. And as an educator, you never know which one you're going to get. So you might be a content area teacher who's going to be working with a large portion of ES or ELL students, and you have to know kind of like the language associated with your content area and how to teach in that way. And that's a big shift that the country is going to need to take for both practicing teachers as well as teachers that are in programs to learn to be teachers.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that entails like a lot of collaboration between content teachers and ESL teachers, but also requires a lot of knowledge of what was mentioned in the article is like the underlying theories of second language acquisition. and how not only do you need to know everything, but you have to, I guess, what they mentioned was informed eclecticism, seen on this slide, where while reading, it sounds like a good idea where you can sort of take pieces of different theories and use them in unique situations. But the article recommends against that. Do you have any other opinions on that?
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting, considering if I just thought of my own teaching, I look at all these theories and I see what the methods and approaches work for my students, and from this article it seems like this is not the way to go, which is confusing if you think about week two's reading. I believe it was Ellis. One of her principles was when you have students that have different approaches to learning, you need to be able to work with that, figure out what works best for them. And if in my head, I think, okay, so informed eclecticism is something that I should have, I should know so that I could look at approaches. Why can't I use something from CLT and something from social cultural approach together
Hmm.
in my classroom if that's what the student needs?
Yeah, exactly. Like it falls back on, Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences of, you have students that have, not only do you have in an ESL class, you have students with different linguistic needs, different cultural backgrounds, the giant plethora of differences that exist, but also, I mean, in a class where every student is from the outside picture, homogenous, you would have a bunch of different learning styles. The same thing exists in ESL classes as well of, some students are more visual, some students are more analytical and stuff like that. And just teaching to one specific strategy seems like to me, it would isolate a bunch of different students. Yeah, I'm also very surprised because, in my, I mean, I'm a foreign language teacher. So in my foreign language methodology class, we talked about a lot of the communicative language theory was the up and coming, it's the current standard of language teaching, and it's different because it is an eclectic approach and it takes from different strategies and stuff like that. So for me, I was equally as surprised reading this, that the quote that they said of, trying to use different strategies is akin to trying to give people different medicines for one illness, like little bits of different medicines and hoping for the best. And that analogy just didn't make a whole lot of sense in my mind, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe they know something that I don't know. But I think the informed piece is the most important part of you have to be very careful with what you're doing. But
Yeah. Well, like to conclude, do you want to like go over some of the issues that you had? Anthony, you just said one where you don't necessarily agree with that analogy. One issue that I had was that this whole article recommended like teaching practices and the impact of these standards, but they also mentioned that it's not based on empirical evidence. And I think moving forward, and this article was 2014, so perhaps it has been done, but like moving forward, I think there'll be a need for that empirical evidence. Kim, did you have any like other issues with this article before we conclude?
Not so much issues, but just thinking at the world ahead for ESL teachers and how we are expected to get more content training, trying to figure out what we need to do in the content areas to best help our students. So that would include PDs, but from the standpoint of a content teacher, they're also receiving these PDs to help them with their ELLs. So I'm just thinking in the future, how much merging is there going to be where you would need licenses for both ends and then it just becomes one single job? Or is that just too much of a load that needs to be separated?
I think they kind of touched upon that around page 26 or so. They mentioned, like, to quote specifically, they said, like, although this does not mean, and by this I mean like by learning different strategies and stuff like that, that um, language teachers must become biology teachers or algebra teachers. It does imply that they need to understand how and why language is used in various disciplines. So I think it's just kind of like, you are it's kind of just kind of like expanding of the traditional scopes of what each of the teacher does. So yeah, a math teacher will be specifically like trained in teaching math, but that doesn't mean that you're only trained in teaching math, that, you will have knowledge of math, but also what does that mean for ELL students? Just like how you would with special ed students, you would have that training for ELL students. As an ESL teacher would also kind of have, yeah, how to work with ELLs specifically, but you also kind of know what that means with math and stuff like that. And that's where the whole collaboration comes in, where you work with somebody and it's good to exchange ideas and see what will work the best.
Great. All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
This
Awesome.
was
Well,
a great conversation that we all had. Great discussion.
yeah, cool. Thank you very much. Okay. It says for me that you're